Well, hello out there. Thank you so much for being here. I am incredibly excited to kick this off, and I don't want to waste any time. If you have ever dreamed of giving a TEDx talk, or you've maybe applied once or twice before and been rejected, not been accepted, you're in the right place tonight. My name is Brian Miller. I am an author, speaker, and consultant on human connection. For my day job, I work with organizations and educators all over the world who want to build environments where everyone feels heard, understood, and valued. That's actually my 9 to 5. But then in 2015, my entry into the TEDx world happened when I gave my TEDx talk, How to Magically Connect with Anyone. I was hoping 500 people would see it, 1,000 people would see it. It got 3.3 million views. It went super viral, and it launched me into a very, very cool, very new world. And these days, all these years later, in my free time outside of my day job as a speaker and a writer on human connection, I get to work with super inspiring individuals on a one-on-one basis who want to conquer the red dot. But before you conquer the red dot, you have to actually be invited onto a TEDx stage. And I cannot tell you how many times on LinkedIn I see a post something like, it took 100 tries in 3 years, but I finally got accepted to a TEDx conference. And there's usually all kinds of comments that see that post as super inspiring. And I get that, but I always kind of shake my head at it because honestly, if you're someone with a big idea, a unique perspective, and a genuine desire to make the world a better place, it really shouldn't take you 100 applications in 3 years to get on a TEDx stage. What you really need to understand is simply what TEDx organizers are looking for, and that's what today is all about. So, before I bring on our panelists, which today is all about them, not about me, because I have never been a TEDx organizer and all of them have been or are. Quick disclaimer, beyond our own experiences with TEDx, neither I nor any of the panelists are affiliated with TED conferences, do not represent the opinions or policies of TED. These are our opinions, our experiences, our perspectives based on our own journeys. Having said that, this live stream is a unique panel discussion with 3 awesome TEDx organizers from all over the world. I'm going to bring them all onto the screen right now. Panelists, you all ready? Give me a thumbs up if you're ready to come on the screen. Almost everybody's ready. Excellent. Give a round of applause for John, Dan, and Erin. Yes. Ah. Doesn't that just feel good though? Doesn't that just feel good to hear that? Oh, I wish we were all together, but given the world we're in, I'm so thrilled we're able to do something like this. So let's do some brief introductions. I'm going to go around clockwise based on my screen, which is going to be John, Dan, and Erin. So that'll be kind of the path for this evening. Why don't you tell, for this morning, John, why don't you tell us, what do you do outside of TEDx? So what is your day job? What's your 9 to 5? And which TEDx conference are you associated with, and where is it? John, we can start with you.
Hello. Yes, good morning from here in sunny Australia. I am actually in Melbourne, so my event is TEDx Melbourne, and as far as I can tell, was probably one of the first TEDx's globally in 2009. So I began there kind of out of enthusiasm. We might go into detail about that later, but what I do as a day job now, because of the time, I used to get asked, how do speakers get on stage? How do they become successful? What do they need to do to become successful speakers? And that ended up turning into my day job. So that's pretty much what I do now. I work with senior executive CEOs of fairly large organizations, if not multinationals, and help them be influential on stage or on little square boxes like you see today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here and for dialing in from tomorrow, which is very exciting for the rest of us here in the US. So Dan, we'll go to you. What do you do during the day, and which TEDx are you associated with?
Sure. Well, thanks again for letting me join you tonight. I'm sorry as well that we're not in person, but hopefully that will be corrected soon. I get my paycheck doing insurance work. I've done that for the last 15 years, from Arizona to Texas to New York. I do find some gratification in it, but I get much more gratification personally from the community engagements that I have in the town that I live in. And that's how I got associated with doing TEDx. It was trying to think of a community event that could have value and bring people together. And the event that I am with is TEDx Oneonta. And I'm sure you know where Oneonta is. I don't need to tell you, but it's just to be sure, and there's no confusion about it. We're not in Oneonta, Alabama. We're in Oneonta, New York. And it's right in the middle of New York, almost right in the middle, upstate New York.
That's right smack dab in the middle. And I was confused for a minute which Oneonta you were talking about. And then I remembered that you're at my alma mater, so I should not have been as confused as that. I shouldn't be confused, but this world throws me off sometimes. It's been a long year, 10 years. How long's it been since we all stayed in our house? It's been a long time. So Erin, let's go to you. What do you do outside of TEDx, and which conference were you associated with?
So my name is Erin Neuhardt, and thank you, Brian, again for putting this event together and having us all together to be a part of it. I am a visibility consultant, so I assist entrepreneurs and thought leaders really looking for authentic visibility options for them, and that's come out of a long history of community building and event production and hospitality. So I've kind of run the gambit in terms of my experiences, and that's where it's landed me today. And I think that it's really tied to the personal narrative and my excitement around people's stories and them sharing them so broadly. And so I was associated with TEDxAmoskeagMillyard, which is in New Hampshire, and it is the Manchester, New Hampshire area TEDx, and it had been running for 10 years. And I took the helm a year and a half ago. My first event where I was the lead organizer was in 2019. So it's an awesome event.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here. And Erin, you and I have had a little bit of work together recently because you've been so gracious. We met in a clubhouse room for aspiring TEDx speakers, and got connected that way. And you've been a wonderful resource. So I'm thrilled. Everybody is here. John, I'm thrilled to have you here. And Dan, you and I have worked together indirectly in the capacity of I've coached a few of your TEDx speakers in the past for your conference. So I'm really excited to hear what all of you have to say to help people who want to get on that stage. And let's start with this. Well, first, for anybody watching this, if you have questions that you want to ask any of the organizers or ask all of the organizers here tonight, any of the panelists, go ahead, put that question into the chat the second it comes into your mind. Just put it in the chat, hit send, hit go. I will watch those, and at the end of this, if we've got a few good questions, I'm going to go ahead and do an open Q&A for the last 10 minutes. I will bring up some of those. And here's what makes a good question, by the way, because I feel like it's always important to do this. A good question is one that is applicable to many people, if not most people, who might be watching this now or at any time in the future during a replay. If your question is super specific to your situation, I probably won't choose it because that's something you ought to be sending an email to one of us or asking us privately. So also, a great question is one that doesn't require a lot of context for us to even understand what you're asking. So to the point questions that are general enough for anybody to appreciate or gain something from would be fantastic. Let's get into the meat of what we're here to talk about, advice for TEDx applications. So I want to start with the red flags. The first question is really simple, and I'm going to start with John, as we said. Is there one red flag, something to you that when you see it on a TEDx application, it just either immediately gets thrown out or it immediately gets set aside to only return to if you absolutely have to? There's something that just totally turns you off, and I'm going to go ahead and solo you each on these questions. So, red flags.
Actually, really simple. Self-promotion. Anything that's egocentric, promoting their brand, their own, not interested. This is not about your own self-indulgence. It's about the theme, the community, and the spirit of TEDx, which is the idea worth spreading. Worth spreading being the key part. Maybe I'll go into that later, but I think actually, I'll go into it now. Sorry, very quickly. Everyone has an idea, but what's going to cause that to spread? What is that one thing that's going to get that person, sitting next to you to go, that was a really good idea, because that's the part that we're really focused on as an organization globally. Very straightforward.
Fantastic. I appreciate you right away going into the idea worth spreading aspect of this, because that comes up over and over and over. And to me, it feels any of us in the TEDx world, that feels like the obvious place to start. But I feel like, I don't know, 80, 90% of people that dream of TEDx just totally miss the worth spreading part of idea worth spreading. And if that's the only thing you really take away from this entire thing, that would be worth being here for. Something that is worth spreading is something that when somebody hears it, they feel compelled to send it or to tell their friend or their colleague or their spouse or someone who they care about, to tell them about this idea. If it doesn't compel people to tell anybody about it, it might be a good idea, but it may not be big enough, right, for the TEDx stage. Is that about right, John?
Yeah, and I like to clarify, it's got to be remarkable outside your area of expertise or industry.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say that again? Say that again.
It's got to be remarkable outside of your area of expertise or industry.
See, that's so interesting. Remarkable outside of your area. So not just something that's really interesting to your people, but something that's interesting to maybe all people or many people.
Yeah, for sure.
Really
cool. I get a lot of professors from universities going, I've won all these accolades within my university. It's like, what university are you from? It's like, and I think it's brilliant, and that's fine. That's fine, but it's not going to adhere to the worth spreading component, and that's how I define the worth spreading component.
Right, because a TEDx conference is not an industry conference. It's not a conference for your industry. It's a conference for all of us, right? Yeah.
It's multidisciplinary. That's part of our license agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Dan, I'm gonna go to you, and I'm gonna give you the spotlight for a minute here.
I almost immediately, I would have said almost exactly what John said at the beginning, that self-promotion or something that you're trying to sell gets an automatic no from us. When we look at some of the applications, we've had a few where they've already done a TEDx or they've done something similar, and then maybe they were very popular with that previous talk, but that doesn't have any bearing on what we're looking at. And if we see as something that they're just trying to sell a book or a product or whatever, no matter how cool it might be on its own standing, we don't want to be a part of it. That goes to the second part, as far as what might kind of go down, to the back burner, if you will, something that we put in reserve, is sort of these like list ideas, where it's like, 5 ways to improve your life kind of thing. The lists aren't awful, but usually when we looked at the applications, when they start giving us lists and things, it doesn't seem like a very well thought out idea, and that it might also speak to more self-promotion. We have had a list, like in 2019, we had one of our speakers, I think you might have worked with her, Phoebe Schreiner, talked about 8 ways to improve agriculture as a leader in the Northeast corridor. So that list was good because it wasn't about her. It was about some of her ideas and how she can unpack them to help agriculture in this area. So lists by themselves aren't necessarily bad, but if we see a list, it may not capture us right away. And then to the third part, which you said, like, what is it that we might have our eye towards? And it's sort of like what John said, what you said in your lead up, is that you want something that is like the questions, like you don't want something that's too specific. We're looking for ideas that have don't need a level of expertise to be interested, to want to see the idea, and kind of speaks to a very wide-ranging audience. So that leaves the door open for quite a few different topics to come forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Erin's internet is blipping in and out a little bit, which is something we are all very I feel like we are all much more understanding of after the last year and a half. So Erin's popping back in right this second. She's coming back. She's on stage here. We are just getting to you. We're here. You're back.
I'm so sorry. I thought maybe Dan was freezing, and then I realized that I dropped off. So thank you so much for having me back.
So before we get to you, Erin, I just wanted to go to something Dan you had just said, which is he had mentioned that that getting an application where it's a list of things is not necessarily a complete turnoff, but it's all about the context. And I remember your speaker Phoebe. I did not work with her, but I remember Phoebe's presentation. And you're right, it didn't even have to have been a list. I feel like in that case the list just ended up being the right format for that talk, but it didn't. The list, the talk wasn't dependent on it being a list. And I feel like what you're talking about is, if this feels more like a BuzzFeed article than a TEDx talk, maybe that's not where you want to go.
That's the way of saying it. Phoebe's talk was probably well organized so that she can give us sections. So like section 1 is this, section 2 is this, and that's kind of how the list was formed. But it wasn't a sequential, you must do A through B or C, whatever, in order to accomplish something. It was her form of packaging her ideas.
Right.
We do get ideas that are, if you do this, you're gonna get to the moon and back, and it's gonna be really easy. Those ones don't excite us.
Yeah, fantastic. Appreciate that. Oh, sorry, John. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think people forget we're TED Talks. We're not TED lectures, lessons, orations, or speeches. And so, in a talk, you would never sit at a dinner table, sit next to a complete stranger and go, let me talk at you for the next 15 minutes. You'll be fascinated. It just doesn't happen. And so I think we need to have the psychology that this is a talk, not a lecture. And I think a lot of people get that.
That's fantastic. That's also very exciting, whatever I'm hearing right now.
That's right.
Is that your doorbell?
Clock.
It's a clock. Is that a grandfather clock?
Yeah.
That's great. Why do you even have a clock anymore? Time doesn't matter in COVID world. Nothing matters.
It gives me a sense of sanity. Bell. 15 minutes have passed. Okay.
That's great. That's great. So, I love that, John, and I think that's a really important point as well to bring up that's often overlooked, which is the origins of TED. Like TED, way back before they were filmed, before they looked like the super polished Olympics of public speaking. They were just conversations with an intimate audience on a stage, and they were just sitting, having a chat. And I can tell you, as someone who came out of entertainment, 10 years plus as a full-time magician before I shifted into speaking, one of the things you learn as an entertainer is it looks like a monologue when there's an entertainer up there, but it's not. It's a dialogue. And the audience's end of the conversation is in their applause, in their holding their breath, and they're leaning in. It's in their it's in the way that they have little chatter right outside as soon as it's done. So you have to remember that, like you said, it's a talk, it's a conversation. If this isn't the way that you would speak to someone sitting around a fireplace, or if you met them in a coffee shop randomly, it's probably not right for the stage. I have a speaker right now that I'm working with who is a magnificent, we've got some folks tuning in, a few different folks tuning in here. Hello, Manoj, good to see you. And Facebook user, also good to see you. That's the problem with Facebook, with StreamYard. You have to go give Facebook permission to do your name. I have a speaker I'm working with right now who's magnificent. She won this massive international inspirational speaking competition, but the first thing I told her is, if we're going to take that and turn it into a TEDx talk, the first thing you have to do is we have to figure out how to get you not to perform it. Because this 5-minute inspirational speaking competition was designed in a performance style. It felt, her speech that she won with felt like slam poetry. And it was magnificent. But I said, that style, that tone doesn't work with TEDx. And that's going to be one of the things we have to do, is figure out how to take that performative aspect and turn it into a conversation. So Erin, I know it's hard being last. So the next question I'm going to reverse and go the other way. I know. Sometimes it's hard being last because you go, oh, all the things I would have said were already taken. What's one big red flag for you?
So I absolutely agree with John and Dan. I think that they had great points, especially about the idea we're spreading. And one of the things that I find a lot of people do is that they take what they're really good at, what they teach, and they try and pitch us their frameworks. They try and pitch us their coaching process or the secret sauce of what works for them. And as John and Dan both shared, we want the idea we're spreading. So what I would encourage people to do is take that idea, like take whatever framework it is or whatever you're working on, and take it to the 30,000 and then the 50,000 foot view. And that's probably where your idea we're spreading is going to come in, versus trying to go myopic and say, this is my secret sauce and this is how I get from point A to point B. As both of them also shared, we don't want self-promotion. And so it really has to be a universal idea that we want to promote and have a conversation with. Think about it that way. If you can have a conversation outside of the event, you know, and want to continue that going on, that's the moment that we're trying to create. We want thought-provoking ideas. And if you've just taken us on this is a very systematic approach, or this is my framework, that leaves not a lot for people to discuss afterwards. I hope that that's helpful. I really do agree with what John and Dan have both said tonight. So they nailed it.
Yeah, honestly, Erin, I go. Oh, Dan, you want to jump in? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, and we might get to this in other questions, in the sense that we look at the negative, but looking on the positive, when we look at applications, you want to be able to expand your scope or take different direction. And if we see in the application that this is all you've got, it may be good, but we're probably not going to be wanting to working with you, because we have to have some flexibility. And we want to see that you can maybe take something out and maybe put something in. So we want to know that you can handle that. As one of our planners will say, she's an editor. There's sort of that phrase, you got to be able to kill your darlings at times. And when you do, you got to be able to replace it with something. And if we see in applications that this is 100% of what you have, you don't know anything else about the topic, that's probably going to come through the application, and we're not going to be interested in it, because the talks always change. I'm sure Erin and John have seen this. When they start with a speaker, or Brian, when you coach them, they constantly change.
Yeah.
And if you have control over the subject matter, then it's not really a problem. But if it's something that you don't have control over, you don't have enough depth in it, then it's going to be difficult. And that's usually apparent at the beginning when we look at the applications.
And I think, if you don't mind me adding, to John's point much earlier in the conversation, where he was talking about, we may receive something from a university professor who really loves their, whomever it might be, who loves their topic and has dedicated their life to the research of it. If you can't pull yourself out of it to what's unique and different and what's the curiosity for the rest of the community, it's going to be really hard. So if I look at an application and this is the talk that you give all of the time, and you're used to lecturing it in a long format, that is probably, it might not be a red flag, but I might look at it and be like, that might be a B pile, only because I'm not sure you're going to be able to get it down to the TED format.
So interesting. Yeah, this is great. I feel like this is one of those topics where now we could use the entire rest of the time diving in on. But I want to do a couple of different kinds of questions that people. So this is fantastic. So Erin, I'm going to come to you first. Yeah. Next, and give John the hard thing, and then Dan, you're going to be in the middle every time. We're going to have to switch this up as we go.
I'm okay with it. Gives me
that's good. That's something that my brother, who's the middle child, would have been like. He'd be like, "That's fine, whatever." So the next question that comes up a lot when I'm working with people when they're getting to applications is, how important is it to connect your big idea to the conference theme or the local community of that particular conference? How much does the local community actually matter? Like, do I need to take my topic and on my application, do all this research on their local community or their institution and then add stuff in there, or can I just kind of hint at it, or just need to make sure that it loosely fits their conference theme? So, Erin, why don't you take that?
I'm so excited about this question. So for us at AmoskeagMillyard, I really felt like we did a really good job of allowing some ambiguity. We usually chose a topic that was pretty broad, and so that allowed us the flexibility too. If we found someone who loosely fit the brief, we would be able to pull them in and use them as one of our speakers, which I loved. But I also think it's important, we really looked at diversity of thought diversity of topics that are going to be discussed that day. And we wanted to do a really good job of both gender parity and just diversity overall. And so all of those things weigh into what goes into our TEDx conference. But what I would say is that for us, we would want you to loosely fit into what we could create, but we also understood that we could probably make most talks work with the topics or the themes that we chose. So we really loved being able to have that flexibility.
Yeah, that's great. Dan, I'm super curious to hear how the different organizers actually respond to this. So Dan,
Sure.
how important is it you?
Well, to start, through the TED license rules, it's not required to have a theme, but I think it's recommended you have a theme. So each year we've put up a theme, and like Erin said, we want to keep it pretty broad. We don't want to exclude anyone with a particular theme, but we want to give them a way to try to connect with us. So our first year, our theme was Tipping Point. Our second year, it was Connect. Then 2019, it was Think Again. We had picked the theme for last year, but we got postponed, which will be the theme this year, which is Changing World. And I'd like to add that we put Changing World before the pandemic. And we put Changing World because we wanted to connect a little bit with the larger TED conference, and that the theme that they were going with had to do with, I think it was some climate change initiatives that they were focused on talking about. So we were looking that direction when we were thinking theme. And then we have learned each of the years that we've put up these themes that the talks, only a few of them ever try to speak to it directly. We understand, though, that with our speaker applications that many folks are not familiar with Oneonta or with Central New York, and so their talks are not necessarily geared to a geographical answer or an idea based on geography. So we recognize that it might be a little bit difficult for them to directly connect it. So we don't hold it against them, if you will, if they don't have an idea that we think is easily connected. However, some of our applications have directly referenced why they think their talk would be good for our conference. For example, in 2019, Kate Scudder very specifically said why she thought her idea would be good for Oneonta. And we definitely appreciated that. She ended up being one of our speakers because it showed that she was thinking about how her ideas could be received by the audience in Oneonta. So that stood out because she was trying to make that connection. And when we see someone putting forth an effort to try to make a connection, then we want to work with them. We're looking for people that we want to work with. And that was a good sign. So if there's not an obvious connection, but there's a willingness to try to create it, then that's something that we were pretty excited about. Each of our years, also, is that we've want to create a mix of speakers. Sort of like, how to say it? We like the idea that we have some local speakers. We want to highlight big ideas that are generated locally. We also want to infuse them with ideas that come from another area. So we've been very lucky in our first 3 years that we've had speakers locally, nationally, and internationally come to our event. And that right. I feel like that raises the bar because then the audience starts to expect that kind of diversity. And we're happy to try to meet it each year because it makes for a very exciting event. But of course, when you're applying, you don't know what the other speakers are going to be doing, what those applications are going to look like. So that's one of those variables that's hard to define at the beginning, what the mix is going to look like. We're looking more at the quality of the application. Then we'll start looking at, like Erin was saying, the diversity that might be created with one selection of speakers versus another, and keeping in mind who's local, who's not. Guaranteed every year we're going to have someone local. We don't know how far we'll be reaching, but we're definitely going to always have a space for a local speaker.
Well, you reached as far as New Zealand. Come all the
way.
Australia.
We had Australia our first year, and then we had South Africa, and then Australia, New Zealand, Canada.
All the way to Oneonta, New York, which you can't even find on a map. That's the thing. Now, John, I'm really curious about this for you because you're in the position where you have one of the biggest TEDx conferences and in many ways in terms of size, but also in terms of prestige. Like TEDx Melbourne is one of these. It's almost TED Global in most people's minds. Like it's a big deal. Not that all TEDx conferences aren't, but it carries a lot of weight. So do you want people to really attach themselves to Melbourne, or are you such a big conference that it really doesn't matter?
I don't feel it needs to be Melbourne-centric. It's easier logistically, but that's more selfish and practical than any other reason. I think if any speaker is serious about being a great speaker, they need to be known and be able to adapt to the situations they're in. You can't just peddle your same idea to different audiences and expect them all to receive it in equal weight. And so we like to think that our speakers can adapt from that point of view. If they don't have adaptability of mind, then it's very difficult in general for them for a whole bunch of other reasons. They're maybe not be coachable. They might not, be able to respond to last minute requests, all sorts of things that happen in events that you can't that you can't avoid. So we prefer, preferably, what we call a cognitive thread, which is a commonality between the ideas. And it's not necessarily with the theme, but it might be with the speaker before them and after them. It might be tone, it might be dynamic, it might be position, it might be angle, it might be a whole bunch of things that people can kind of see the continuity of that idea throughout the conference. And we've had one conference where we had one speaker say, internet is the best thing that ever happened to humanity. And we had the last speaker saying, it's the worst thing that's ever happened. But no one noticed because the thread sort of shifted over time and people were able to absorb the different perspectives simultaneously. And I can't remember who said that, the definition of genius is to be able to hold two opposing ideas at the same time and not have any internal conflict. And so that's what we're trying to instill in our community: open-mindedness, reflectiveness, and the ability to adapt. To answer the big question, we cap our events at 2,500 people. I find it just gets not unwieldy outside of that. We get a lot of applications because of that, and therefore we can probably go, well, we need to narrow it down, otherwise we're going to have to accept everyone, and you can't accept everyone because we get hundreds of applications anyway. So we generally pick a theme for that reason.
You just got at something, John, that I was really curious about, because I find myself with a lot of the speakers that I coach on this process, reminding them of something that does not seem to be obvious, which is that it's so interesting that you brought the two opposing ideas. I end up dealing with that where I've got a speaker who, on one hand, they know that their talk is going to live on YouTube, completely independent and isolated of all the other talks the same day of their conference. It's the way YouTube works. But at the same time, so they're trying to deliver their talk that's going to help their message or maybe help their career, do whatever they're trying to do, right? They've got their aims. But I have to always remind them, but remember, the organizer, your conference team, they're putting on a live event for real people in a real room or a virtual room this last year, but for a community. And so I have to remind them, the organizers are putting on an actual conference for people in that room, in their community. And so part of what you were just alluding to, that you're hoping that somebody will be able to fit into an arc throughout the day or tone or something, that's not something a lot of speakers are thinking about, because they're thinking about just their video later on YouTube in a bubble. But that's really important, that at least that they're malleable and open to not necessarily compromising, right? But finding a way to do what they need to do in a way that also serves you and your conference. Do I have that about right?
Yeah, it's about respect. If they're not going to respect our event, then they're not on our stage. It's simple as that.
That's great.
The other point that we've got is I've actually got data that proves how likely they are to get good engagement with our community. And I can show that to them and go, look, you can deviate if you like, but this is the outcome it's going to create. It's going to reduce the shareability, and it's going to reduce the proportion of success of shareability online. You have that choice, but my recommendation based on this data is you shouldn't do that.
It's wild. It's wild. Have you ever had anybody push back on that?
No.
When you put numbers in front of their face?
No. One of the beauty in the early days with TED, we used to actually get the data from the TED YouTube videos. We actually had the password to the YouTube channel. And so I could work out when someone would pause, rewind, and abandon a video. I would then rewind it 30 seconds, work out what they did or said, worked out the statistical significance of that causing that problem, and then I mapped that. And I actually have the data to prove that certain behaviors, certain angles, certain things that you do will impact someone pausing, rewinding, or abandoning a video. And if you don't care about that, that's fine. But if you do, then that's the data.
I think there's actually a TED Talk on that. What are some of the characteristics or the behaviors in a talk that are connect with the audience and what don't? I forget who did it, but I remember watching it. It was fascinating because they referenced what you just said as far as timing, physical gestures, statements, and things. And
there's a few people. Julian Treasure does a bit. Amy Cuddy does a bit. There's a few out there that kind of go there. I mean, maybe it's because their TED Talk was deliberately high level, but I've actually got much more granular data than that. But maybe they can share it because it's you can't in 18 minutes.
Well, I can tell you, as somebody who's run YouTube channels for years, I have access to all that kind of data. And if you've ever wanted to be really depressed, you can go look at that data and find out to the second when people turn off, stop, go away, drop off of your video. It's really painful sometimes to look at that. And on one hand, it's really helpful. On the other hand, you can lose your mind. You can reduce what you're doing to a science instead of an art. But I think what you're saying is there's still a science. I refer to short form inspirational speaking as an art embedded in a science. And I insist that my speakers learn the science of storytelling, the structure of storytelling, and then you put your art, you put your spin into it. But there is a structure. It's been around forever. Like, we know how stories work. Yeah.
I mean, even last year, because of online, we're able to shift our NPS from maybe the 50s to the 90s. Just in the last 6 months, because we know the data about what's causing someone to engage.
Yeah. Do you this isn't really like I don't know. Do you have one quick tip on one thing that like immediately causes people to disengage? I think people would be fascinated to hear an example, like a real specific example of that.
Well, it comes back to the original red flag, which is ego. If you start talking about I and me and aren't I successful, it turns people off every single time.
Yeah. I got to tell you, it's so funny because just a couple days ago, I had one of my speakers that didn't even realize they sent me a script and we were going through it. And I just quickly did a find. I went to edit, find, and I hit I. And I went, you have I 111 times in this script in 12 minutes. So we got to fix that. Right. And it wasn't like the talk was meant to be egotistical. People don't realize they're doing that. But, I was just like, okay, so here we can I can show you the problem. If I is in there 111 times, right, which looks like 3 eyes. So it just made me laugh. I was just like, we need to find a way to you can tell your story, but then you need to turn the corner. Once people are care about who you are and why you're the person giving the talk you're giving, you need to turn it to them. You need to show them why it's relevant to them in their lives and in different industries and people that might be watching 5 years from now on YouTube and you have no idea who they are. It needs to still be relevant to them. Yeah. Yeah, this is great. Thank you for that. Anything else, Erin, Dan, on that before we go on to the? All right, Dan, I'm gonna start with you. For you, on does TEDx Oneonta first? Do you have an actual an online application nowadays?
Yes, we've always done an online application.
Okay, so because there was a point where. That was a couple of years ago when every conference finally started doing that. Until a few years ago, many conferences still did not have an actual online application, but it seems to be pretty much everybody now. So the question here is, which aspect of your application actually carries the most weight? Like if there was, there's a few standard pieces to many, if not all, of the TEDx applications I've seen over the years. Which aspect of yours is like, if you were really only giving weight or paying attention to one part of the application, what would it be?
Probably depends on what other TEDx organizers require in their application, but with ours, we require to answer some questions, give a potential title, a summary, and some key points and things. But we also require a video, a short 1 to 2 minute video. And I would say that is probably the thing that can make or break an application being successful in our evaluation of applications, because it tells a lot in that video what that person is thinking when they're presenting their idea. We've had some submissions that came in on a camera phone and looked terrible, and we started to think, oh my gosh, if they're going to do this on a camera phone to make this kind of impression, what are they going to be like to work with? And then it also, with the video presentation, they have to really succinctly say it, their idea. So we'll read it, but we also want to hear them say it. We can start to see how much they are passionate about the idea. Usually with those videos, there's more words in it than in the actual questionnaire that we require, so we get a little bit more detail on it. We look at the production quality of it. And so I mentioned Kate Scudder before. I think you work with Kate, right?
Kate is one of my students and has become a dear friend and a colleague who I collaborate with a lot now, but I did coach her for years. And she was a blessing to work with. She was like the easiest. Yeah.
She was, I loved her talk. She's a wonderful person. And I was very thankful that we connected with her. And her video was wonderful that she sent us. Like I said before, she referenced directly why she thought her idea would be good for Oneonta. And then when we watched the video, she made the video specifically for us. And she talked to us in that video, and she talked about her idea, and she clearly did quite a production for it. So that made her application, although when it started, some of the nuts and bolts of the application didn't really excite us. They weren't awful, but they weren't jumping off the screen at us. But the video did. And I think each one of our successful applicants has submitted a well-prepared video.
That's great. That's so useful to know, because at the end of the day, it is going to end up on YouTube. It is going to be filmed. It is going to be in front of an audience. It's a multimedia experience. It's not a blog post. It's not a book, right?
Right.
I'm going to go to Erin next. So
Awesome.
What's the most important part of the application for you?
So I think that if you looked at our organizing team, each one of us probably would have a different piece of the application that really stands out. And something, I don't know if it's unique to us, but we encourage people to also nominate people for our TEDx. So you don't necessarily have to apply to our TEDx. You can get nominated as well. And we may reach out to you to encourage you to continue the application process. But I think, to Dan's point, I need to understand very clearly what your idea is. And if it's ambiguous, or if you've given me multiple ideas that you could talk about, but you're not succinct about it, that really is the thing for me that I'm looking for. I want to know that you believe in it, and I want to believe in it for you. So really, as a part of the application, as you're going through, filling it out, that's the first part. If I get partially completed applications, I'm likely going to take those out altogether. But then in addition, really taking the time to not just spitball your idea, but really have a thoughtful conversation and put it into that application so that we can see it and we can start to believe in you too.
That's great. So what I'm hearing you saying there is there's been a shift over the last 5 or more years. I feel like before 4 or 5 years ago, it wasn't as necessary that you had a really super condensed, clear idea. It was easier to have kind of like I've got this idea, and you could get into a TEDx conference with that, and then you'd help shape it on the way. But somewhere around 4 or 5 years ago, and this may depend on different parts of the world, but I saw this push for I started seeing that the people I was working with, I had to do the kind of work with people that I used to do after they were accepted to get them ready for the stage. I had to start doing that work just to get them accepted. We had to get to that level of clarity just to get the application for. John, I see you nodding. I see Dan nodding. John, you want to jump in with that and then do yours as well?
I mean, to Dan and Erin, I mean, we actually make ours compulsory that you have to use a phone to apply, the phone video, because we got at this period where people were just massively overproducing the idea, yet the idea was still not that interesting, which leads us to Erin's point around, they've got to be clear. We have one question that's really critical. What is the short bullet points that describe your talk? And I'm very specific on that wording. If it's not short, then it's probably not clear in their head. If it's too many bullet points, then it won't fit in the time frame for a TEDx talk. So they are two red flags for us instantly that they're going to be extra work for us. Now, I'm not against extra work, but we have someone with a clear idea and is not going to be extra work. We would prefer to work with them than a great idea and we know we've got to do a lot of work to get them over the line. So it's more a practicality point of view, point of thing as well. The idea still stands. If it's not a great idea, which is what I mentioned before, like, well, that's how you use your area of expertise, then, then this other thing's kind of more superfluous. So in my mind, if it's clear in your head, it'd be completely clear in your audience's head. If it's not clear in your head, the audience hasn't got a chance. And so the short bullet points, it has to be a few, not too many, because most bullet points, if you turned it into a talk, every bullet point maybe 2 to 3 minutes to fully explain. And it's short, it forces clarity. And if there's clarity, then there's impact. But if there's no clarity, it's muffled.
That's great. I feel like that's such a useful. There have been so many good things here, and I feel like on every one of these questions, we all could have gone on for another hour or two just diving into. I think we're all kind of geeks over this style of storytelling and inspiration. We have a few questions, and we're kind of pulling into the last 10 minutes. I want to make sure we get a few questions in from everybody in the chat. So there are already a few questions. If you have a question, now is the time, your last chance to pop it into the chat that I might see it before we do this. So and anybody can kind of just toss your hand up if you want to be the one that takes one of these questions. Let's do a very simple technical question first, and we don't need to belabor this one. From Jen, how do you discover upcoming conferences or themes to pitch for before they've elected all their speakers? This is a fairly technical question, but I think it's very useful. Who wants to grab that?
Well, I mean, if you go to TED.com/TEDx, you can see all the events in your region.
Perfect. That was a great answer. It's TED.com/TEDx and search by geography.
And you can add your theme to that, so they can see that there. We add our theme on there. So
Yep, and it's great, and it's a really, really useful search tool. They've made it very, very interactive, and you can search not just by geography now, but by all kinds of things. Right now, you can search by if it's going to be virtual or in person, if they have a theme or if they don't. There's crazy amounts of stuff, and you can decide how far am I willing to travel, for this, and just look within that. How far out? I think a lot of people don't realize how far out they actually need to be thinking about this. A lot of times I'll tell people who come to me before I'm even working with them, I'll say, if you've just had the thought just now, someday I'd love to do a TEDx talk, I tell them you're at bare minimum 12 months away from doing it, probably closer to 1.5 to 2 years. And people are like, what? I thought I was going to do one like next month. It's like, no. So how far out would you recommend people are planning to apply or starting to look at conferences?
Well, I can add a little bit, and we have a rolling application. And so we only close it during the time that we're assessing the applications that we're going to have for the upcoming year, the upcoming event, and then we reopen them. And so anyone can apply at any time, and they may take almost a year to hear back from us as to whether we're considering them. So I would say think long term, and even if your idea changes slightly or you want to, massage it a little bit, if you do end up getting accepted, you've put your name in the hat. And honestly, sometimes we've had people that we've had to say no to for 1 year, but we've really loved their idea, and we've come back to them the next year and encouraged them to reapply and have accepted them then, because we really loved them, but we couldn't take them in that specific year.
That's really good to know. That's great. I want to go to this. This is an interesting question. This may be tough to condense. I'd love to hear from anybody or everybody who wants to jump in on this. What's your most helpful tip about storytelling? This is like hey, do we have 12 hours? But what's one helpful tip about storytelling? And I would say, specific to the short form inspirational speech format.
I'll jump in quickly and say that, like you talked about before, that this is a personal statement and we want to see you and the idea together. And so that makes it a story. And if I were to give anyone advice going forward as far as what they're going to do, as far as prepare their talk, I would say, for me, even though I haven't given a TEDx talk myself, but when I think about what sounds really good, as I've been listening to the Moth radio hour with those personal stories, and those are all just personal stories. They're not big ideas, but it's wonderful because they're unscripted and they're personal stories, and the best ones really just draw you in. And so I might point to someone to think about, where's the personal part of it, and then how can you also teach me something at the same time. And that's why I've grown to appreciate the Moth, because it's probably just as scary as doing a TED talk. You're doing something that you're exposing yourself in this particular way, and you're trying to make a very quick connection with an audience in front of you. So I find that is where you infuse your personal attachment to it with the idea. It starts to engage me.
And this is a tough thing to do, right? To our earlier conversation, to tell a personal story in a way that doesn't feel like it's all about you. It's actually kind of the key to TEDx talks, by and large. If you're not a scientist or a researcher who's kind of delivering something big about the research they've done, if you're doing what we kind of think of as the TEDx format, it's really hard to do, to tell a personal story without having I show up every other sentence or multiple times per sentence. Erin or John, do you have any big tips on storytelling?
A lot of people get over attached with the hero's journey, and then it gets predictable. Now they're going to do the challenge. Now they're going to do. Don't get attached to the formula, I think, is probably the first thing. Storytelling if you will rely on a script or a formula, it'll be predictable. When it's predictable, it's not engaging. So that's the first part of that. The related part to that is that when we're telling that story, we've got to be able to create the curiosity and intrigue. How do we position it to cause them to consider what you just said, rather than just listen to hear what you just said? Mm-hmm. Because people don't need facts, data, and information. Everyone knows you should eat well, do lots of exercise. No one does it. It's not what people know. It's what people do. And in storytelling, how is it going to prompt them to do something, to feel something, to recognize something, to associate something, to relate to something? It's got to engage their mind. Storytelling is a human factor. And this is where I think storytelling and great storytellers really have an edge, even if they're telling exactly the same story as everyone else.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The idea that I feel like one of the things that I see go wrong is when people try too hard to make their story. It's weird. I feel like it actually appeals to more people. It draws more people in when you don't work so hard to try to make it about everybody. Just great story. Like, there's lots of TV and movies and things I watch that I've never had anything like that happen to me, but I'm completely gripped by it because somewhere at the bottom of that story is some fundamental truth about humanity that almost anybody can appreciate. And I feel like that's again, it's like none of this is easy to do, or everybody would have a TEDx talk and we wouldn't have to do a panel like this, right? Like, none of this is easy to do. Yeah. Anything to add to that, Erin, before we do one more audience question?
I would just say, remember to edit. Because when we are talking amongst ourselves, if I'm just having a conversation with any of you, I'm going to want to put every single detail in, and I'm going to want to tell you in gross detail what's going on. And we don't have that luxury on the TEDx stage. It has to be a certain time limit or less. And so a lot of times people forget that it's okay to edit and to really go with the most impactful things that will actually have your story carry more weight. And a lot of times, some of those minute details will weigh down the story in ways you don't want it to.
Man, I love that. I love that so much. I can't tell you how many times the folks I work with get tired of me saying, I say something to this effect, you're telling a story, you're not on trial. We don't need all the details. We don't need every single thing that happened. And what's hard is a lot of times when it is a personal story, some of those super minute details are the ones that are the most visceral to you because you lived them, but they're not necessary or relevant to the idea worth spreading. And it's is this necessary and relevant? You've got 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 8 minutes sometimes now. Necessary and relevant. This is great. I've got a really interesting question here from the chat that I think what this question is did you ever see a talk within somebody, like somebody that you knew, a friend, a colleague, someone, did you ever see a talk within them and they weren't even trying to go give a TEDx talk or thinking about it, and how would you convince them that they actually need to go pursue this thing? Anybody have something like that?
In some ways, they're the exact speaker we want. Yeah,
what was it? Sorry, John, I missed that.
In some ways, they're the exact speaker we want. It's not an ego trip. It's not I've got something that it's an honest, sincere, maybe challenging or intriguing idea. I'm looking for curiosity and intrigue all the time. So if they're able to do that, then I talk to them about it, and talk to them about that, have you ever thought about how this could be interesting to other people or whatever, and see what they're thinking. And then, because a lot of them come up to me and go, I don't know why you're asking me to go on this stage. That was one of the most common questions I got asked, because I was actually actively going out and finding these speakers in the early days. Didn't have so many applications in. Having said that, a bit of a tip now, we get about 500-600 applications a year. Maybe one will get through. Because
did everybody hear that who's listening to this? Don't be discouraged if you get one rejection.
Right.
Yeah, and it's because a lot of them is self-promotion. But give them a context. If there's a context about why you think it's a great idea, why you think its time has come, why they might not have thought about it, and then ultimately it's up to them. It's a choice. You can't help them, but I like to think I'm pretty convincing.
I agree with John there, that if you can get someone like that to speak, then you're going to have a wonderful talk. However, TED Talk may not be on their mind, and it just takes some time to work on it. I have one speaker that I want so badly, because I know the work he is doing, people need to hear about it. And it goes beyond the actual application of the thing that he's doing. I think it's going to be a wonderful thing for people to hear. But he's not ready yet, and that's fine. I'll just every year I'll talk to him about it, and we'll get a little bit closer. And I'm sure eventually he'll do it once he's ready. And I know it's going to be amazing. I just know that he's got that character. He's a wonderful speaker. He's got this big heart. He's going to have this wonderful idea, but he's just not ready yet, and that's fine. I'm not going to pressure him on a deadline. I'm just going to keep talking to him, and eventually he'll get there. So when I work on recruiting speakers, I don't try to pressure them. I just talk to them about why I think they would be great as a speaker. And then once they start thinking about it, then I'll start getting a sense of when the timing might be right for them.
Yeah, isn't this just so interesting that there's all these people desperately trying to get a TEDx talk, and then there's other people that you're like, you need to do this thing, and I'm giving you the golden ticket, and they're like, what about that? No, thank you. It's just it's such a crazy thing. Erin, did you have anything there?
I totally agree with what John and Dan said. 100%. I think that some of the most unassuming people, some of the people who have not considered being a part of the stage, are some of the most remarkable talks I've ever heard. And I will go a little bit further and just say, we usually do a rehearsal the day before with all of our speakers so that they can come together as a cohort and really feel like they're a part of this special space. And the number one thing that I get out of so many speakers is, I don't know why you chose me. And it is so beautiful to stand there in front of someone and say, like, for them to say, I don't know why you chose me. And I say, that's exactly why we chose you, because you are going to change the people's lives in this room. You're going to give them an idea to think about on a much grander scale. You're going to plant a seed that someone down the road, it's going to affect their lives. And that's a part of the magic of what we get to create with TEDx.
I love that. And that has, in a tangentially related way, that's happened to me with my podcast a few times, where I get a lot of people that email me cold trying to get on my podcast, and I basically accept 0 of those, especially because it means they haven't listened to my podcast, because my podcast is always people that I already know, that I've met. That's the theme of the show. But nonetheless, I get that. I'm like, well, you haven't heard it. I get that. But then there are people that I've invited on my show, and they'll be like, oh yeah, I knew you had a podcast, but what's it all about? And I'll send them the website, the link to my website for the podcast. And they'll see all these super famous people, all the celebrities that have written all the books on all of our bookshelves, all the books behind you, John, those people. And they'll come back to me and they'll go, oh, I think you've misunderstood. I don't belong. I've literally had so many people go, I don't belong in that group of people. I'm like, no, you do. I invited you. Like, I didn't accidentally invite you to my podcast. I'm like, well, why would anybody want to hear from me? And I'm like, because you just said that. Because you just said that, and you have this story that I know, because I know you personally, that you're exactly the kind of people. And that Dan, that is telling us that it's time to wrap up. That was it. The clock has spoken. It's time to wrap up. So I'll do a quick round robin here and let is that even the right? I'll go around the room real quick, and I'll do one last thing, and in 20 seconds or less, kind of like super TED style. If you could psychically beam a message, a lesson or a piece of advice into the mind of every aspiring TEDx speaker on planet Earth instantaneously, what would the one thing you would tell them be? I won't put anybody on the spot who's got something that just wants to jump in first.
I would say do the work.
Do the work.
Do the work. There's so many times where they just think they can just rock up on the day. I mean, or they might sort of loosely put a little bit of effort in. I will work with professional speakers. The ones that earn 7 figures from the speaking, for every minute they're on stage, there's 27 hours of preparation. So there is nothing that they haven't covered that they should know about. They need to do the work and make sure that they could be the best possible talk that they think it could be. Don't just turn up and just hope you can riff. Won't work on our stage.
I love that advice. So many people, especially the problem with being if you see a really phenomenal speaker, is that they're so good it seems like they're just talking, like they're just having these ideas for the first time and conversing with the audience, and people get this idea that I don't want to rehearse, I don't want to script, I don't want to write it word for word because I'm going to get robotic. It's like, no, it's the opposite. It's the opposite. You need to do this word for word. You need to script. You need to rehearse. You need to go so far past rehearsing to the point where it looks like it's the first time and it feels like it's the first time you've ever told those stories. I love it. Do the work. Do the work. Erin.
I would say show up to serve. Show up in service to the audience, to the event organizer. Just show up in service and you will gain the benefit back.
That is fantastic. Everybody, because you were soloed, all of us were going like this when you said show up to serve. I love that. And Dan, close us out. What do you wish everybody who was applying to your or any TEDx conference could know?
Yeah, I think going third makes it easy to say I'll agree with the first two and say that what John said as far as doing the work. I think planning and giving yourself enough time to do it. I think some folks that do apply, they're rushing, and that's usually evident. So I say give yourself your time, like John says, do the work. So in order to do the work, you need to give yourself time. So prepare and plan, like you said before, 12 or so months ahead of time is what it's going to take at least. And I would say that would fit at least as a minimum. And then to what Erin said, look at it, like you said, show up to serve, but also think of it as it's not about you and your TED Talk. It's about the event itself too. So you want to be a part of it 100%. And so we plan our event to think of not just the videos that are created from each of the talks, but the mini conference that it is itself, and all the talks together. The audience there is sort of like a musical performance. You think of all the participants and all the players there, and we want to make it an event for everybody. So think of yourself as, I'm not just putting forth a cool idea. I am coming to be a part of this community for a couple of days. What's it going to be like? And if you look at it that way, I think you'll find yourself excited about doing the TED Talk and not just trying to accomplish something for whatever career path you're on.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. I can't thank you all enough for being here. I think that anybody who saw this now, who sees it in the future, who sees this 5 years from now, is going to find so much value in the conversation that we just had. John, Erin, Dan, thank you so much for your time and for your generosity today. And I can't wait till we can all somehow, even internationally, see each other in the real world. And John, good luck with the new lockdowns in Melbourne. I hope you have a lovely lawn to just stand on and stare at the world from. All right, I'm going to close everything out. Thank you so much to everybody who was here. If you have anything else, you can always go ahead and put anything in the chat. You can reach out to any of us. We'll have all of everybody, all the panelists will have all of their social links or anywhere they'd like you to be able to connect with them in the description within the next 24 hours or so. Thank you so much to everyone, and have a lovely morning, afternoon, or evening.